Welcome to Torah Smash, the podcast for nerdy Jews, where our lives of Jewish learning collide with our love of nerd culture. In each episode, we discuss what we lovingly call a Torah Smash, which we have defined as a beautiful collision of one thing from the world of Judaism with another from nerd culture. I am Barak Malkin, and joining me today are
Ethan Lane Miller,
RDY,
Linda Maizels.
Woo! Our guest today is Dr. Linda Maizels. Linda is an independent scholar and researcher on anti-Semitism. She is currently an adjunct faculty member at Spertus Institute, where she teaches a course for the Master in Arts and Jewish Professional Studies and lectures also for their leadership certificate in combating anti-Semitism. She is also a member of the Advisory Council for the Brandeis University Presidential Initiative to Counter Anti-Semitism in Higher Education and a senior research fellow at the Program on Extremism at George Washington University. Linda has a picture of her and her parents with William Shatner from a Federation event where she says he gave a speech that was very bizarre and rambling, but who cares? It's Shatner. Also, Linda's favorite fantasy novel is Susanna Clarke's Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, because it's fantasy with footnotes, and it doesn't get much better than that for a historian. Finally, Linda claims to be old enough to remember standing in line to see the original Star Wars in the theaters when she was a kid, and for the record, she always thought that Han shot first. Welcome, Linda.
Yay.
I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yes.
So happy to have you.
Sorry for talking over you. Han shot first, for sure.
It's a conversation.
Absolutely.
There's nothing wrong with it.
Great. Well, I will say that your bio is exactly the kind of person that I wanted for this episode, so I'm really glad that you were able to join us. As you know, some of the listeners probably know, Ethan and I are both current Spertus students. And so to have somebody on, especially with Spertus's current combating anti-Semitism certificate programs, thought was a really nice pairing. So I appreciate you joining us today.
Well, I will tell you that it's very rare that someone says, you're exactly what I'm looking for. So I'm going to enjoy this. But yes, I did teach Ethan in a class and have done 2 rounds of the anti-Semitism certificate program that they have. So,
awesome.
Yeah.
Great.
And
great.
Congrats on being at Spertus. It's a great place.
It is. It's really nice. It's wonderful. All right. So this will be the episode that comes out prior to the anniversary of the attack on Israel on October 7th. And while the events since then have been changing and happening rapidly, instead of focusing on the war and the conflict in Israel, I want to focus more on what seems to have risen drastically since that time, and that is anti-Semitism. I've been wanting to do this topic since January of 2023, but I couldn't find the right smash for it. That month, the temple where my family belongs, where my wife is the executive director and where our son goes to preschool, was attacked. Somebody threw a Molotov cocktail in the early morning hours before anyone had arrived. Wow. I'm not going to go into the details, but I remember the pain and sorrow I felt that this home of ours had been attacked, and I couldn't believe that, just like the similar attacks on the other congregations around the country, it had finally come to our home. And then almost instantly afterwards, the community had supported like you would not believe. The temple organized an event that was open to the local community, and there were so many people that they filled both indoor sanctuaries and had to put an extension to a TV outside to the front lawn to hold even more people. I could not believe the support. The juxtaposition of this anti-Semitic attack, followed by this overwhelming outpour of support, felt so strange, but yet slightly familiar. So what classic nerdy trope do I want to discuss today that is based on this and other similar events of anti-Semitism?
In vogue since October 7th, 223.
Yeah.
So this is not something specific. This is a theme.
This is a wider, closer to an Ethan topic than I would like, but it is a larger idea.
I don't know what you mean by that.
Yeah.
But...
So a difficult or problematic event and then overwhelming support. That's what we're looking for. And we're looking to match that. That's our smash.
Yeah.
You have stumped me. Not a good way to start, but Ethan, I'll throw it to you.
Oh, thank you. Great. I was hoping to have more time to stall, so I'll keep talking, RDY, so you can come up with something. I guess one of the questions I want to ask is, I'm approaching it from 2 ways. This could be something that happens like in universe, and I'm quoting this as like something that takes place in a comic or a movie or a TV show. But I'm also trying to wonder, like, if you're taking a like real world approach, like there's a special event and then there's like a real world rally of support or something that happens. That's kind of where my head's at right now.
It is a very big topic, right? It's a nerdy trope that happens a lot in superhero movies, sci-fi movies,
Oh,
movies in general. Yeah, go ahead.
like the moment. Oh no, that's a little too specific. I was thinking of the moment in the second Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movie where he's got webbing strapped on two sides of. He's like trying to hold.
Oh, the cable car and the school
the
bus or
cable
something.
car,
Yeah.
and the goblin is throwing stuff at him, and then all the New Yorkers start throwing things at the goblin.
Yeah, I will say that's a good example of this. All right, so I want to discuss the question of, do superheroes always attract supervillains, or is it the other way around? Right? This balance of good and evil that the universe seems to constantly put on itself, both in our world and in any sort of fictional world, right? So I'll start us off with this topic. I think one of the classic examples of this is Batman. Gotham always seems to have its problems, but their supervillains didn't arise until after Batman came on the scene. Gotham had crime lords and people like Thomas and Martha Wayne trying to fight against them, but characters like the Joker, Two-Face, Riddler, etc., they didn't show up until there was a superhero. So does the imbalance of good and evil cause the world to try to balance itself out?
Does that mean then that conflict never ends?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Oh, wow.
In
That's
the sense of Batman, there's, and again, going to the first Batman movie, which was also like had a lot of classic comic book tropes in that movie, being like the first, like if it wasn't for the 1989 Batman movie, there would be no Avengers Endgame. But there's a moment in that where the Joker yells at Batman, like, you made me.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, I may have made you, but you made me first. And
Right.
and then the Joker is like,
Yes.
oh, that's so childish. I say I made you, so you have to say you made me, which is a very Joker way to respond. But he's also correct.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what, and related to anti-Semitism, this seemingly waves that come over our history that rise and fall. I was on a call last week and somebody had talked about the shift from, I forget his name, person who was in charge on a side attacking Israel during the Yom Kippur War in 1973, and then showed up in the Knesset in 1977 shaking hands with Golda Meir.
that's Anwar Sadat.
Anwar Sadat, yeah.
Right. He was the person in charge of attacking Israel, and then
Actually, let me just also jump in. So Sadat led Egypt.
thank you.
So yeah, so as far as in charge of, a coalition of countries would have been melded together for that.
Right.
But Sadat made initiatives or made overtures for peace, and then the attack. Sorry, go on.
Yeah. So that, like, this shifting that happens over, and there's many examples of this over history, and seemingly come in waves. But I think this shows up in many examples of nerd culture, just like the Batman one, and like you said, RDY, like that's exactly what I was talking about. We're like, you made me. No, well, you made me first. Which is it? Like, do these rises of good happen because there's evil, or do these rises of evil happen because there's good?
Well, one of the things we have to be careful of is make sure we're not putting Jews in the position of having provoked the attacks against them. That anti-Semitism is not hinged or connected to Jewish behavior. There might be perceptions of Jewish behavior, but it's not necessarily real. Also, just to take it back to Batman for a moment, is that Batman in his early years, what would that, 30s, 40s, he was a less ambiguous character. He was a fighter for good. It isn't until I think the 70s, 80s, when does the Dark Knight come in? When all of a sudden you have this conflicted Batman that has a streak of darkness and perhaps evil in himself. So he's fighting against himself as well as fighting against and creating other villains. And maybe that's in my head because I listened to your previous podcast on Lashon Hara and cancel culture.
Yeah.
And so I'm just thinking about all of this, that it's not always completely clear who the good guys and the bad guys are.
Right.
Yeah, the Dark Knight has long been kind of a nickname for Batman as long as I've been reading Batman. And I'm trying to remember when the series came out. I feel like it was in the early 90s.
Where he shifted?
Where like the title came out. Early
Frank
90s.
Miller, are we talking Frank Miller's Dark Knight? Is that what you're talking
Batman?
about?
Yeah, Frank Miller's Batman the Dark Knight.
That was late. I think
1986 was when Frank Miller wrote The Dark Knight.
I'm just thinking also of the television show. I mean, a sillier example of Batman you could not find. And the villains were silly as well. So when did that internal darkness of Batman and also the hideous deformities of the villains become not an amusing wham, pow, bang? It became something very real.
You missed one.
Which one?
Smash.
I know, I thought that. Whoops, missed it.
I will say, even in that silly version, though, right, Batman still was created because of the darkness that happened around him or to him. So he still became this force for good. And then these supervillains arose, right? This matching good versus evil in the world and why one happens and then another follows, sort of thing.
And I mean, a part of it is the nature of literature as well, that in order for the silly version of the comic books, for Superman to swoop in and stop, a couple of regular mask-wearing burglars, that's entertaining for a very, very short while. You need to have a conflict in a narrative that is high stakes and interesting. And there's no high stakes between normal people and Superman. So literarily, the need for supervillains is absolutely because of the existence of superheroes and vice versa, because it raises the stakes of the conflict. But in anti-Semitism, it is an old trope. I joked earlier, like since 223, that's just about right, historically speaking, because according to Yossi Klein Halevi, who is an author and one of the major teachers at the Hartman Institute in Israel, he talks about how anti-Semitism turns the Jew into a symbol of whatever society deems is the most hated of attributes. And so for the early Christians, we were Christ killers. For the early Muslims, we were prophet killers. And in the sense that, if we understand today how they react to satire of the prophet, like how much worse is it for the Jews to be prophet killers? Marxists thought of Jews as capitalists. Nazis thought as Jews as race polluters. And now, and this is again, semi-quoting Yossi Klein Halevi and semi-remembering, now in an era of international human rights where the most detestable human qualities are genocide, apartheid, colonialism, and ethnic cleansing, well, look at what we're accused of.
I can just add to that. I think that's great, RDY. And thinking along with what Yossi Klein Halevi said, there are those who would say that the Jew is necessary as the scapegoat, as the arch villain. For instance, Jean-Paul Sartre, who said famously, that if the Jew did not exist, then someone would need to invent him, so that you could have this eternal foil, this eternal villain. And again, this flips on its head. Who are the villains and who are the heroes? Similarly, Howard Jacobson, who is a Booker Prize winning British novelist, wrote a fabulous, fabulous book called Jay. It's just called Jay. And it never actually uses the word Jew, but it is in a post-war reality where Jews are not, you can't even speak the word Jew. There are not supposed to be Jews anymore. There are not supposed to be differences between people. But when all of that is repressed, there's a need for Jews. There is a need for a place where hatred can be expressed. It's an absolute, I'm not doing justice to the book. So for both of those authors, you need an eternal supervillain so that you will know what is good.
Interesting. Well, on the other side of this, right, we're talking about all this hatred that Jews get through anti-Semitism for a variety of reasons. And it was still so not startling, maybe startling to me when we had that much support after the attack on the synagogue, as well as, I will say, I was pretty surprised by how welcomed Hirsch Goldberg Poland, one of those individuals who was killed during the Israeli conflict. They spoke at the DNC convention, and I was nervous about what the response would be because the world seems to not be in favor of Jewish people. And nobody wants the war. I think we all agree that we wish the war would stop. We wish all those who were taken or returned home safely, and that, innocent civilians in Israel and Gaza would stop being killed. I think we all agree on that. I still find there to be a lot of hatred towards Jews, regardless of what that stance is. And I was shocked. I was pleasantly surprised by how well welcomed those parents were to the DNC. And so, my second question, So does support for the Jewish community only increase because the anti-Semitic attacks against them are also increasing? Like, is there this matched level up of that, or do we know? I see some shaking heads.
I don't think so. I think quite the opposite. You know, I have a dear friend who's a fraternity brother. We went to college together and we've reconnected recently. And he will very often refer to Israel specifically as like colonizers. And he admits that, yes, so is America and so is anyone with land. But he gets very riled up. And he definitely like has love for me as a Jewish person, and I have for him as a non-Jewish person, but it's a struggle for him. And I don't think the rise in anti-Semitism, the way it is showing today, causes a rise in support for the Jewish people. I think it's having the opposite effect. And I think that what anti-Semitic events, hate crimes, do cause a rise in support for the victims of the hate crime, but not anti-Semitism writ large.
Yeah, I find it really hard to disagree with you, RDY.
One thing that I think we need to be careful of also is that when you're speaking about anti-Semitism, it is malleable. As RDY brought up earlier, it has morphed and changed over the centuries and millennia. And one of the problems we have now is that there are different things that, for lack of a better way to put this, there are different things that different political orientations say like about Jews. Many on the left will tell you that they are not anti-Semites, of course, but there was no sympathy for Israeli Jews or anyone Israeli, even the day after October 7th, before any incursion into Gaza had begun. And I believe that that was the shock. I'm someone who has studied the ups and downs of anti-Semitism in this country, mostly from the 1960s onwards. And these ups and downs have happened. I think that the rawness of the immediate lashing out at Israelis who did nothing more offensive than get murdered at a music festival, all of a sudden there was this outpouring of you got what you deserved, which is not what we would expect to see in most crises where innocent lives were lost. Clearly, for too large a, not all of the left, for segments of the left, there was no such thing as an innocent Israeli. The right is certainly, in many ways, today's political right in America, much more overtly supportive of Israel and perhaps harboring some Islamophobia, anti-Muslim sentiment, that too. But then we've also heard candidate for president Donald Trump talk about how you are a bad Jew if you're going to vote Democrat. So clearly, both the political right and the political left have ideas of what a good Jew is. That might not coincide with what any of us as Jews feel, but it's uncomfortable. And Barak, I think when you talked about the fear of how were the parents of Hirsch Goldberg Poland going to be received at the Democratic Convention, thank God they were received well, because I think for many of us, we were holding our breath.
Yeah, I have a friend who's talked to me about when he's experienced anti-Semitism and tries to share his sadness with others who aren't Jewish. Immediately they pull the conversation to what's happening in Israel. And he says, who talked about Israel? It's not anything that I said. I'm talking about my experiences with anti-Semitism, and the conversation seems to be just drastically connected to that event right now. And it feels to get closer and closer to home for some reason. I think it's more acceptable for people to be anti-Semitic in public. My wife had shared a story from the other day where there's a teacher who was outside and went to go around the building. This teacher is not Jewish at the preschool at the temple. And as she walked around, a car drove by and said, F you, Jew. She's not Jewish, but these people felt it was comfortable enough on the main road to yell that out the window. I would say likely because of what's going on right now in Israel and Gaza, and nothing related to who they are, right? Obviously, because they're not Jewish. But this outward anti-Semitism is so strong. And I think you're right that it does feel, the word easier feels so wrong. A lot easier for people to have that mentality and that it's okay for some reason.
I mean, I have to, as I'm sure many of us can relate to, like, I have to think very carefully how I answer certain questions. I went and treated myself to a massage after camp this year, and massage therapist asked me where I work, and I shared where I worked, and she goes, "Oh, are you Jewish?" And I paused before I respond because I had to weigh, like,
This
all my
person's going to
choices
give me
here.
the extra hard massage
know,
that I
like-
don't want.
Like just that question could have undone the entire massage.
Right. I mean, thankfully I said yes, and she was the best massage therapist I ever had. But we all have to make these judgments.
Yeah.
I think it's also who is allowed to join anything. When you think of, you build this podcast, and I love it as nerd culture. But there have been, and when you think of the classic 50s definition of a nerd, it's the opposite of the jock. It's the not popular people. Certainly they'll let anybody in. But nerds sometimes don't. I mean, I think of Gamergate, for instance, when that was a real reaction to women or people of color trying to be a part of a culture that other people wanted to claim as their own.
Yeah.
And so a lot of this is who is allowed to join, how are you defined? And I think that one of the reasons why anti-Semitism feels so pervasive is that Jews are asked to answer a question. Who are you? Because the majority of American Jews are, let's say, liberal or vote for the Democratic Party, but to be completely in sync with the people around you until the subject of Israel comes up. And all of a sudden, well, for me, I've become this sort of weird quasi-fascist in the room. And that's a strange feeling. You think you're among your people, and then you're not.
This ties really well to another point I wanted to bring up, which we've all talked, it's going to make its way back to the podcast. So here comes the second topic for this one, is that I wanted to point out from the recent X-Men 97 series. I think that just like the world's reaction in that show to the Genosha attack and the mutants, this world's reaction against Israel and Jews after October 7th didn't prompt sympathy. As you said, it seemingly did the opposite for some reason. But I will say that even in that show, there were those that held on to that hope. And I kind of have that hope as well. And I think these things come in waves. And I'm just curious, do you guys share that hope?
I'm trying to.
For better or for worse, as I said, I've been studying this phenomenon, and particularly on American college and university campuses, from the 1960s through the 90s is what I wrote my dissertation on. Listen, there have been flare-ups before. There will always be flare-ups. The 67 war was one. This more recently, the Second Intifada produced a flare-up on campuses. They die down in a certain sense when the immediacy of the problem goes away, but they leave a residual. They leave, I almost want to say, an imprint on cultural memory that adds, it's this growing, when I'm in class, I talk about it as layers of an onion that build upon each other. It is one more memory of the Jew or the Zionist or the Israeli as the supervillain. If we could just deal with the Israel problem, the Middle East would be fine. The world would be a more peaceful place. That kind of thing.
I think once we dip our toe into Zionism, we're starting to do what Barack's friends did. And it's a sticky wicket because they're all attached. And another thing that Yossi Klein-Levy said was something to the effect of, it's not on us to show that anti-Zionism is different from anti-Semitism. It's up to the anti-Zionist to show us, not just say, hey, I'm not racist, but to actually act in such a way and discuss policy and not people. And, problems with there are particular Jews who are some pretty awful people, Smotrich, but, that doesn't mean the Jewish people are X, Y, or Z.
I mean, I struggle with, there's a couple of things. One, I went to a talk once with my dad, with this historian, and it was, I think in the first 6 months of the Trump administration. And one of the questions he was asked was, do you think it's going to change? He said, oh yeah, because nothing's consistent. Everything changes. The question is it going to change for the better or for the worse? And I'm kind of debating right now what I think will or may not happen for us. And then the second thing that I think about a lot is we live in such a day and age where nuance is not particularly popular these days. And it's hard when we try and sort and categorize ourselves because it's very human nature. And I remember after October 7th, I said to a friend at work, I was like, I've never felt more politically isolated right now. It's a very interesting, is maybe not the right word to use, but I'll say interesting for lack of a better word right now.
Yeah, when I was telling my wife that the attack on the synagogue is what was the spark for this conversation I wanted to have, she had said, well, do you really think we would have had that many people if it happened today? And I don't think we would have. I want to say yes, the appearance of Hirsch's parents at the DNC make me feel like there's a possibility, And I think my optimistic side, even with all of the horrible stuff going on, wants me to think that there would be. And I think I need to hope for my kids. Like, I don't want to have a world where they're constantly hated upon because of the religion that they were, of the household that they were brought up in. That's a terrible world. I don't want that world for them. Anybody.
Perhaps, yeah, perhaps one of the things that we need to do also is to make clear, and certainly not everyone's going to have the same answer to this, but what do we need? And one of the things that I think is needed, and something that we're starting to see on campuses, is Jews who are Israel supporters call themselves Zionists. I'm aware there are many who do not. But Jews need to be able to respond, and it needs to be accepted that they are speaking in good faith. There was an incident at Columbia University where there was an actual event that was organized that was supposed to allow Jewish administrators, Jewish staff, Jewish students to be able to express themselves. And there were some Columbia administrators who were there and were caught passing around some pretty awful texts saying, oh, this protesting about anti-Semitism, this is going to get them a lot of money, this is so hard to listen to, these are privileged people, et cetera, et cetera. I think that one of the things that would give me hope is that if more and more we stress that we all need to hear uncomfortable things, opinions that we don't agree with, and we need to accept that, and we need to hopefully assume that the people speaking are speaking in good faith. And I think that if Jewish students had a better experience now of being able to say, this is why this is personally painful to me, and getting a supportive response back, then maybe, Ethan, people like you, me, maybe all of us wouldn't feel so politically homeless and would feel like even if much of the left doesn't agree, they're ready to listen with open ears and open hearts.
There's something even scarier that's happening on college campuses, I think, and it's the complete belief that because we have a cause that we can rally against and that energy that these rallies cause, we don't check to see who's behind our rally. And when my eldest joined the tent camp where they go to college, my wife and I had different reactions emotionally, but the same reaction intellectually. And when I said to them, I want you to take a look at the tents and look in the center of the tents. And if they're all exactly the same and they're all brand new, then you need to find out whose money is supporting this rally before you support this rally. And they texted me later like, oh my God, they're all the same. And they never found out who was supporting the rally, but they also never went back. And it's one of those things where, in this era where I hesitate to generalize, but I'm going to say Gen Z gets so much of their information in 2-minute clips or shorter. And what is going on in Israel is just far too nuanced to be able to boil down to a TikTok video. And TikTok videos are very convincing because they get all the likes. And you think just because something has 100,000, 10,000, a million likes, that it's correct. But it might just be loud. And it might be liked by all the wrong people. And there's no way to tell that. But when I look at Israel and I look at what's happening in Gaza and I look at what's happening in the West Bank, I see two completely different situations. I see a situation where Israel in the West Bank is completely in the wrong. I do not like what Israel is doing to the people of the West Bank. I do not like the settlements. I think they're incredibly problematic. And then I look at Gaza and I think Israel has made mistakes in Gaza, but I don't think Israel's completely in the wrong in Gaza the way I think they are in the West Bank.
It's hard to engage in nuance.
Right.
Yeah.
And to have that conversation where they don't understand, a lot of the people on these college campuses don't know there is a difference between Gaza and the West Bank because they call it by its old name that isn't used anymore.
When I hear people, I think the thing that I come across often is people saying, well, I don't like that Netanyahu, and Netanyahu is wrong. I don't have a problem with anyone opposing any political administration that you don't like. But what I always say is, how do you feel about the leadership of Hamas right now?
Nice.
Because this is part of it as well. If you think that Netanyahu is completely evil or inspired by bad motivations, what do you think of Sinwar? And that's the conversation that I want to have. There are all kinds of Israelis. We know that there were hundreds of thousands of Israelis that came out to protest their government, and they were allowed to do so. I want to ask if will that happen in Gaza? I mean, obviously Gaza is in a ruin, but even in the West Bank, protest is very difficult. And, we know the reasons why. And I think that people that want to pop off very quickly about the Israeli government, which is fine, need to know a little bit more about Israeli society. And many of them, of course, don't know that there are Arab citizens of Israel. That's another problem.
Arab citizens who have way more rights than they would have in their own countries because of their other affiliations.
Can I ask, I still have this hope looming in the back of my head of what's going to be next, right? We have this very low part of this wave of anti-Semitism, and I do think it's going to swing back. And I want to ask, what do you think has to happen, or what could happen to help us swing back? I had to write a paper for one of my classes at Spertus, and I will share this because that class is over. So if you haven't taken the class yet, you can't use this idea. I think that in order for it to swing back, and we need something like a Got Milk campaign for Israel, right? Some pro-Jewish love thing to help people see the truth behind, or like the truth campaign for the smoking, right? To see the truth behind the statements and the sentiment and the news articles of what these facts that we're talking about, that you need to dive a little deeper to get it. I think there needs to be some mass propaganda type campaign to give Jews in Israel love back that we have lost. So do you think there's something that could happen to shift towards a less anti-Semitic? RDY is sharing a Got Israel logo that he found somewhere. Perfect.
Well, that brings me back around to the necessity of a supervillain.
Mm-hmm.
If Israel ceases to be the boogeyman in general and the easiest target, who's your new supervillain? Because I don't think we're getting rid of villains.
Right. Where does the hatred go?
That's exactly what Howard
It's
Jacobson asks.
so fascinating. Oh.
I'd be concerned about any sort of propaganda campaign because it would instantly go to George Soros is funding this propaganda campaign.
Well, Ethan, you're in charge. How do we fix it?
I think it has to be a little more. I think you're taking a top-down approach.
Yeah.
I think I would want to try and figure out what is the bottom-up approach.
Yeah.
It might have to be conversations with friends. It might have to be more organic, and it's hard to do that in an organized fashion, I realize, but I think it has to be a little bit about like personal connection, and maybe it's about like, maybe it's me telling my massage therapist, yeah, I am Jewish. And she went, oh, I've never met someone Jewish before. And then like we had a perfectly normal interaction for the next, I think it was an hour, So like maybe that's what we need to do.
You had to talk through your entire massage session?
No, but like every so often we'd like say something to each other. But what I'm saying is like she met someone Jewish, so I didn't have horns or a tail or anything.
Yeah.
And we had a just completely normal interaction.
It just sounds like the dentist trying to talk to me when they're working. Like I don't want to have a conversation during a massage. I'm trying to relax. And if I have to talk about my Jewish background and educate somebody while getting a massage, I feel like it's a little counterproductive.
But actually, I don't think that the conversation has to be about explaining what Judaism is. I mean, if she was interested, I would have talked about it. But I think it was just establishing I'm Jewish and then having everything else be a completely normal interaction in the context of whatever that was. In this case,
I get it. Yeah. You talked about Star Wars. You talked about Star Wars to them.
There was a very weird, they had like a rotating playlist. There was a song. It was the weirdest like song I've ever heard. It was like one of those like relaxation soundscape things, but it had sleigh bells, and it annoyed both of us. I didn't say anything. She didn't say anything, but she just silently got up and like hit next and then got back down and did it. And I said, wow, that was like celebrating Christmas on Neptune. And she laughed.
That's very funny.
I don't know where I was going with that.
Actually, can I just jump in, Ethan? You want to hear weird? There's a version of Jingle Bells that William Shatner does that is surreal.
It's the best thing I've ever heard.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a completely full circle is so bad that it is on my holiday playlist on Spotify. It's so bad. It's so
good. Dog we had in high school that was so ugly that the needle flipped over into cute.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
Did I ever tell the story on this podcast about the high school principal I had to run in with when I was in college?
No, I don't think you have.
I was the technical director for a traveling Shakespeare company when I was in college. And part of my job as the tech director was to schedule our performances in high schools in and around Illinois. And one of the high school principals who was trying to book us actually showed up at our scene shop, and we were closing up shop, and so I'm like outside in a baseball hat because I always wore a baseball hat to the shop, and asked her to come back another day. She came back another day, so I'm wearing a baseball hat again. She's trying to schedule us, and she wants to schedule us during the week of Passover. And I said, actually, 3 of us are Jewish, so we can't do it at that time. And she says, oh, are you one of the Jewish ones? I said, yes. She says, oh, is that why you're always wearing a hat? And I thought she meant like as a yarmulke. So my response was, no, I'm not that religious. Now let's forget the fact that that's an incorrect answer. I was in college. But she goes, oh, only the religious ones have horns?
Yeah.
Yeah. And sadly, I reacted in a non-teaching way. If that same thing would have happened today, I would have said, hey, maybe I should come to your school and talk about anti-Semitism rather than Shakespeare. But instead, I just made sure that we were busy anytime she asked for a booking. So I just
shame.
refused to schedule her. Yeah, my bad. And I think a lot of this, and this is partly, again, I'm going to circle around and make myself answer your question, Barack. How would I solve the problem top down? I would stop allowing leaders to split us into us versus them.
That's a good one.
I think that having an enemy is very good politics. It's very bad humanity.
I want to jump on, but then I want to have Linda answer this also. I dare to say, hey, person who tried to schedule with RDY, if you're listening, he would be happy to come and schedule with you now, I'm sure.
100%. If I knew your name or remembered the school or anything.
Yeah, Linda, I'm really curious of your answer to how do we fix this, the expert. I know you said if we fix this, the hatred goes elsewhere. How do we fix the hatred?
Well, you can ask anyone who knows me, I'm the resident pessimist.
No!
What can I tell you? It never goes away. Anytime, I believe this, you can believe humans are fundamentally good, fundamentally bad. But I think one of the things that scares people, for instance, about socialism, the idea of melding us, everyone the same, eventually dropping national borders, I don't think people like that idea. I think being part of a huge universal collective scares people. They want to feel tribal or familiar, or they want to know the comfort of, I'm going to go to this place and I'm going to have a great discussion about early Batman comics, and people are going to get me. And once you find that tribe, you don't want to leave it. So I think that unfortunately, people will always be suspicious. How do we mitigate it? One of the things that I would say, and this is again, particularly in an educational setting, life is rough. We all are going to hear things that we don't like, that offend us, that scare us. That is just simply a part of life. And we need to learn how to deal with that. And we need to learn how to, again, listen with empathy. It does not mean that we have to agree with each other. I'm not asking everybody to hold hands and sing Kumbaya. I want people
to I am. That sounds so nice.
I know, it probably would be nice. I'm a terrible singer. What can I tell you? But we have to be able to listen. And I think we need to also know, what is the difference between something threatening? When is that line crossed? One of the big questions right now is the definition of anti-Semitism. When does something cross the line from being a political statement or maybe something just offensive to being something threatening or anti-Semitic? And we all, not just Jews, everyone needs to know the difference between that. Is someone speaking from a place of ignorance or a place of malice? It's a lot of decoding, but what it means is stepping back and listening and trying to see what another person is trying to put out to us. For the most part, I'd say challenge yourself. Listen to one thing every day or read one article every day you're not going to agree with, and see what it does to you.
All right, we fixed it, which is great. I'm glad we have fixed this. So before we head out, I do want to ask just one more nerd question. We talked Batman and Gotham. We talked Magneto and the mutants and X-Men 97. I'm so surprised Ethan didn't dip his toes into Star Wars at all, but are there other instances of nerd culture where this does good attract evil or does evil attract good concept show up?
Well, I'm so glad you asked, because I was going to ask Linda about the Sisco and Gul Dukat and the Pa Wraiths and the Prophets from Deep Space Nine, the best Star Trek.
You read my mind. Yeah, yes, of course. And even Sisco, I love all the Star Trek captains. Captain Benjamin Sisco is my captain. He's the one that I would follow. I would follow him anywhere. And Sisco has also some difficulty, some darkness within him with the death of his wife. Ethan, I know
Was her
we've
name
shared.
Fran?
What was that?
Was her name Fran?
No, not not
Oh,
Francisco. San Francisco. No.
That took me a second. In the pale moonlight, when
Yes.
Sisco gives in to the moral neutrality or evil of Elam Garrick, the best character ever.
The best.
And yeah, the battles between the paw wraiths and the entities in the wormhole, all of that. And that's the beauty of Deep Space Nine. It's what Star Trek fans, diehards, really hated about Deep Space Nine is its moral ambiguity. But those of us who are a little nastier, I suppose, we loved it.
I would say those of us who are more well-rounded.
There you go.
I think you can't have the Sisco without Gul Dukat and vice versa.
I would totally agree. Gul Dukat, one of the slimiest villains ever. Love him.
This is my favorite fact to bring up. This is a show made in the mid-90s. There is a line where Gul Dukat says, "My goal is to make Cardassia great again."
Wow.
Yes. RDY's face right now. Yes. Eyes wide. Yes. From the 90s.
And I'm just going to throw this out there because, again, I did listen to your Lashon Hora podcast, but Ferengis, if you're going to talk about the Hogwarts goblins or the Harry Potter goblins, you got to talk about the Ferengis as really a terrible Jewish stereotype, but what terrific characters, and they learn and get better.
We did. We talked about them. Go back and listen to the episode called Jews in Space.
Oh, I love it. Okay. I thought that was a reference to pigs in space, but that's really.
Anybody else? We talked about Deep Space Nine for 30 minutes. Anybody else have another reference?
Not like 30 minutes.
You brought this upon yourself, Barack.
Sure,
I just want to put that out there.
Well, I mean, that was a Star Trek reference.
Yeah.
Star Wars also clearly the dark side and the light side. Yoda talks about how there needs to be balance in the universe. I just don't think I think balance in the universe can be closer together. I don't think we have to balance each other by going to the fundamentalist extremes of everything.
Yeah, I wouldn't have said Star Wars for that exact reason. It doesn't seem to shift so drastically on the edges of the seesaw. It seems to teeter a little bit more in the center for the most part.
Well, Star Wars is complicated. I know the episode preceding this is about the Acolyte, and that episode was recorded prior to the series being unceremoniously and incorrectly canceled. And I think there's perhaps a later conversation to have about, Star Wars is very focused on the light side and the dark side, and people didn't seem to react very well to the exploration of some of the nebulousness or the gray that can exist there. But I will defer to Linda, who just raised her hand.
Well, I want to ask you a question. So I am not, I'm more minimal in my Star Wars knowledge. But with Darth Maul, for instance, I love villains. I can't help it. I have that evil side. I adore Darth Maul as a villain, but from what I hear, I don't know if this is canon or not, he has a very complex story and he's not a straight evil character. But boy, did they make a mistake when they killed him off so quickly. He was fabulous.
They killed him like 3 times. He's one of those that keeps coming back.
Yeah, he gets some complex stuff. And I would even say there's a character in the Acolyte who is, by the end of it, pretty gosh darn evil, but also very complicated and is perhaps one of the best teachers we've ever seen in Star Wars. It's very interesting.
Nobody's mentioned. Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead, Lynn.
No, I was just thinking of the Wicked Witch of the West. I'm sorry. She seems pure evil, but Margaret Hamilton in the 1970s went on an episode of Mr. Rogers because kids were so freaked out by the Wicked Witch of the West. And she went on there without the green makeup, but with, the hat and the dress. And she said, well, Mr. Rogers, that witch, her problem, she was just frustrated. And I thought that was fabulous. That's an explanation. Maybe what you think is pure evil, there's just some frustration there.
That could be it.
I am very excited to see Wicked later this year also.
Samesies. Nobody's mentioned the MCU. And I think that's a really good example of this good evil seesaw tottering of like at the beginning, terrorists kidnapped Iron Man. And so Iron Man made his suit. And so then the Ironmonger came into being. And like he had to up his suit for that. And like Tony Stark especially is constantly trying to one up the bad that has happened, and so the bad has to always one up what he's improved upon, to the point of now we've messed with the multiverse and that's kicking us back. Like the villains keep I think this is going to be an issue for the MC where they bring in new heroes and storylines that start much lower in a risk level, but are being compared constantly to Endgame and Infinity War because those stakes were so high and such a good story that they have to rebuild back up the seesaw because it's really difficult to keep it going from that top level of shifting from really good to really evil and back again sort of situation.
That's one of my biggest hopes for Brave New World is that there's a big reset. You know,
Mm.
you're no Steve Rogers. Well, yeah, I'm not that. I am kind of a less than, and that'll bring us to, Young Avengers and other like not quite as big and monstrous heroes.
Yeah.
Higher, but still higher stakes because it's easier to bring high stakes when you're not all powerful.
Well, I will say that for those that are upset, we just mentioned Captain America, the new movie, but not the Sabra appearance. Our next episode after this one will be our deep dive into the history of the superhero Sabra from the Marvel Universe. So
Gonna be fun.
Yeah, stick around for that one. Let's close this episode by acknowledging that this has been an extremely rough year. A lot of lives have been lost since a terrible attack on October 7th last year. And while the attack was against Israel, the rhetoric since that time has been very anti-Semitic and towards Jews all over the world, regardless of their stance. It seems like the topics of Israel and Judaism are inseparable. It's hard to have a conversation about Israel without Jewish identity coming into play somehow. And although in the present, the future is uncertain, I think we can acknowledge that we've been here before. We faced worse and we found the light at the other end. So please continue to show love to one another. Continue to have hope for tomorrow where there is peace and where every mutant can feel that where every Jewish person can feel safe and welcomed. Linda, it was really great having you on this episode.
Yeah, thank you for being here.
Is there anything that you'd like to shout out in perpetuity? Any projects you're working on or anything else?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you guys so much for having me on. And thank you, Ethan. It was really great to see you again. And I hope that you will stay in touch. I hope we'll all stay in touch.
Yeah,
One
absolutely.
shout out. I am going to be in London. We're going to have an event through the London Center for the Study of Contemporary Antisemitism. I'm going to be speaking with Anthony Julius and David Hirsch about October 7th, a year on. And it will take place in London. And this is based on an anthology of books that I contributed to, published by Routledge, Responses to 7 October. There are 3 volumes, Law and Society, Universities, and Anti-Semitic Discourse. And they are all academics and others contributing their thoughts in the aftermath of the 7th of October. We will also be in Krakow speaking at the JCC there on the 9th, but I don't have any details about that.
Where can people go to find out more information about these?
Please look at the London Center for the Study of Contemporary Antisemitism. I will also be posting on my LinkedIn profile.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of other events coming up. This episode drops on the 25th, so you're listening to this after that date. So I'm sure there's a lot of events in the next 2 weeks leading up to the anniversary. So, all right, great. Well, that'll do it for this episode of Torah Smash. Our fiscal sponsor is Jewish Creativity International. Our theme music was created by Sean Fogel. You can check out Sean's bands and studio work at www.thesleepywest.com. This episode was supported in part by Juice. Juice, which stands for the Jewish Comics Experience, is a full-day convention that brings together fans, creators, and industry professionals to explore the rich history and contributions of diverse Jewish creators and content in the comics medium. Juice is created and hosted by the Center for Jewish History in New York City and will be held this year on November 10th. If you are interested in attending or to learn more, visit juice.org. That's JEWCE.org. Also visit the Center for Jewish History at cjh.org for new information on the institution and their partners. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to rate and review us wherever you listen. It helps others find us and is an excellent way to support the podcast. We want to hear from you and continue today's nerdy discussion. Go to torahsmash.com to find where to connect with us online, purchase swag from our store, support us with a donation, find previous episodes, and more. And why do so many Jews like the character Magneto? Because he's attractive.
That's my guess.
So this is like the lighter side of anti-Semitism.
Yes.
Oh, that was bad. I love that.
did I ever tell the story on this podcast about the high school principal I had to run in with when I was in college?
If we say yes, will you stop?